Good evening, and thanks for joining us for The Science of Chocolate, Melting the History and Science. I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Since we're virtual tonight, please excuse any technical issues or glitches that may pop up. If you have problems with your video or audio, click the reconnect button to get back to the webinar right away. As we begin, I want to go ahead and ask a quick question. What is your favorite type of chocolate? There you see the options. Obviously, they all end with chocolate. Is it milk, white, dark, semi, bittersweet, or ruby, or is it any? Duh. I will throw out there my favorite, dark chocolate with a nice glass of red wine. We're going to keep these options on the screen just for a few moments. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll have a replay of it online by tomorrow afternoon. Also, if you have a question for Dr. Davis, pop it in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. And before we go, we'll highlight 3 other webinars coming up in our The Science of series. So let's go ahead and take that poll down. It looks like most people like the dark chocolate. 40% of our audience right now likes dark chocolate. That's their favorite. Milk chocolate, 26% is second. White chocolate, third. And then we got a tie, semi-sweet, bittersweet, and any of them. And then ruby chocolate at the very, very bottom. So at this time, I would like to introduce tonight's guests. Tonight, we welcome back Dr. Lizzy Davis to our webinar series. Dr. Davis is a registered dietitian and currently an assistant professor and director of the Dietitian Education Program in the UAB Department of Nutrition Sciences. She earned her Master of Science in Foods and Nutrition Science from East Carolina University in 2015 and became a member of our alumni family in 2020 after obtaining her Doctor of Science in Foods and Nutrition Science from the School of Health Professions. Dr. Davis, thanks so much for returning, and we're excited to learn a little bit about chocolate.
Yeah, I'm excited to tell you guys about chocolate. So I hope everyone has a sweet treat next to them that they can enjoy while we go through this presentation tonight. So first off, thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be back. Today, we're going to be talking about the science of chocolate, melting the history and science. As I was introduced, thanks for that introduction, by the way. My name is Lizzy Davis. I'm the director of the Dietitian Education Program. It's a program in the Department of Nutrition Sciences that trains students to become registered dietitians, which is really ironic that I'm doing a presentation on chocolate. But if you've ever had a desire to become a registered dietitian, please contact me. You can go to our website, the Department of Nutrition Sciences website, and look me up there, and we can chat more about what your journey will look like. So without further ado, we will get started. So I want to give first, to start off, some maybe untraditional disclosures. Usually this is the part of the presentation where you tell people who's paying you so that they can make the decision of whether or not they're going to trust you or how trusting they're going to be of the information that you give them. These disclosures that I'm giving you, as I mentioned, are a little untraditional. I want to be clear of kind of what my background or what my training is on this topic. So I am not a chocolatier. I think any of my friends would laugh if they saw me put together some beautiful chocolate piece. What I am, though, is I'm a lover of chocolate and a lover of science. I kind of very much accidentally stepped into the chocolate expert, if I use that term loosely, at UAB. It all started when I was asked to contribute to an article that was published about sort of the health benefits of cacao, the cacao bean. And we'll talk about those later. But they wanted a registered dietitian to kind of give their take on things. And so I volunteered. I looked up the research. I contributed to that one article. And then people kept calling me back to give my opinion, my thoughts on chocolate. And so I kept having to do more and more research to keep up with all the things that were going on in the literature. And I got a quote from UAB's public relations person. Shout out Adam Pope if you're out there. And he told me that I was in over 200 not publications, but articles of some kind that I was contributing on chocolate. And that to me was astonishing. And I can confidently say that a registered dietitian who has a reputation as a chocolate expert is doing something right. So I kind of wanted to share a little bit as to how I got involved in this chocolate world. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, I have heard from a number of you. It was really cool. A lot of you guys actually emailed me and said, I love this topic. I'm so excited to learn about XYZ. And you would tell me something that you're really interested in. And so I would go back to the presentation, add that part, and I would add in what everyone's sort of interest was. And so this presentation really grew based off of y'all's feedback. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a lot of different topics here, but I'm going to touch on them very briefly. All of these you could go and do their own presentation on. So I hope I'm not leaving anybody without some key piece of knowledge that they're really wanting. But if you want more on one of these topics, definitely reach out to Greg Berry, and he can maybe put something together, and we can plan another webinar. So what to expect for today: brief history of chocolate. We're going to talk about chocolate production from growing all the way to getting it in a form that we recognize today. We're going to talk about some health benefits that are associated with chocolate, talk about working with chocolate in the kitchen. We're going to talk about something called fair trade chocolate. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how chocolate is connected to Valentine's Day. So you can see there's a lot of things to cover here. So we will get started. So a very, very brief history of chocolate. We do not know for sure, but it is our best guess that chocolate was first discovered in 1900 to 500 BC. We know it's kind of in the Mesoamerican region, but that's about all that we know. We know that the Mayans and the Aztecs at a later date kind of took that chocolate and they made it into a drink. And this drink was, it was consisting of those cocoa beans, chili powder, also water, herbs. And so it was a drink kind of similar to hot chocolate, except it was not sweet and it was a little bit spicy. It was bitter. And so that's how they consumed chocolate. That then boomed to Spain, Europe, America. And I think it's so interesting that the first chocolate bar wasn't actually made until 1847, which really in the grand scheme of things isn't that long ago. And so you can see that really it started as this drink, and more recently it became this sweet chocolate bar that we know it to be today. And then from there, it just expanded. Hershey opened, and American kind of revolutionized chocolate. So we're going to kind of switch gears here and talk about chocolate production. So step one, we have to grow the cacao. These cacao pods are grown on a tree called Theobroma cacao tree. So if anyone questions how healthy chocolate is, you can say that chocolate is a plant-based product. And so you can see it grows from these trees. It is the fruit of these trees, and the cacao pods are those brown things hanging down from it. And these trees grow really well around the tropical areas close to the equator. So I've highlighted some of these areas for you. So that's where you can find these trees growing. The next step is that after the cacao pods get to a form that that you're ready to harvest, is you cut them down. As I mentioned, this is the fruit of the tree. also takes about 5 years for these fruit to get to a form where they're ready to be harvested. And these trees don't produce these pods until 5 years after they've been planted. And so you can see how this crop would be, not quickly overturned, because it's going to take a while for it to grow fruit before it can be harvested. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So if you were to cut open that pod, you will find some white substance, but these are the cacao beans. And then it has this kind of paste on the outside that does have some sugar on it. So that's what it looks like on the inside. We then take these cacao beans on the inside of this, and we go on to step 3, which is fermentation. This part of the process is really, really important. And it's important because it gives the cocoa or the cacao its chocolatey flavor. To me, this is probably the most interesting part of the chocolate production. And that's because there has been so much research, and then also so many like insider practices that have gone into fermenting the cacao. So people come up with their own different mechanisms or ways that they feel like the fermentation process is the best. So it could be the temperature that they use, or the amount of time that they use, or, these different factors that go into this fermentation process. And like I said, that's really important for developing the flavor. And so if you can make the flavor of the product really good, your product's going to be better. And so when I was putting this presentation together, I found that I had a bunch of different pictures on here trying to show you the process of fermentation. But I decided that a video is probably the best way to get this information across. So Greg, do you mind showing this video here?
So here we are at Zorzell Fermentorium, a key stage in the process for improving the flavor of cocoa beans is fermentation. Really, there's a couple key drivers to quality. I would say one is the type of clone, type of varietal. The second really is the fermentation and drying process. So in this episode, we're going to really talk about fermentation. After 2 years of studying and doing different trials of different stages of fermentation, we came up with a design that fits us the best for the clones we have here, for the temperature, for the climate, and for what we need logistically to process the volume of our demand. First, let me start with fermentation. Cacao is a fruit. Seed is covered with pulp. Pulp is a watery sugar substance outside the bean that is really the fuel for fermentation, right? So beans come as wet beans covered with this pulp to the fermentary. We put them in these boxes, these cascading boxes, to ferment the beans. The first stage is anaerobic process, okay, where the microorganisms or the yeast start eating the sugars in the pulp. After 2 days in the first box, we turn into aerobic process, where it goes to the second tier and starts producing acetic acid. The sugar content at this point has been dissolved by the microorganisms, and the microorganisms are working to produce acetic acid and heats up the fermentation process to about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So we do another 2 days in the second tier, and then after 4 days, we switch to a 1 day rotation and then a final 1 day rotation. So it's 6 full days ferment. In this process, we examine the color of the beans, we examine the odor of the beans, and we do cut tests to examine at what level the beans are being fermented and if it needs a day longer ferment or a day shorter. So when you smell these beans, you get in the beginning a very heavy ethanol smell. In day 5, which this box is, you're getting more of an acetic acid aroma. So the temperature has dropped now in day 5, the ethanol is gone, we're in acetic acid, and really this is kind of the final stages of fermentation before it goes to drying.
Okay, so with that, I hope that gave you just kind of a feel for what that fermentation process looks like on a slightly more detailed level. They showed you at the very end what that looks like if you slice those beans in half. And you can see that from day 1 to day 6, it takes about 6 days for this fermentation process to happen. And the insides go from a purpley color to more of a brown color. The outsides go from this white color to a brown color. And it also loses this little pit on the inside by the time day 6 comes around. So that's kind of what the differences look like from start to finish, and how you know the fermentation process is done. So moving along to step 4. So after fermentation, the next step is to dry and roast the cacao beans. There are different ways to slice this pie, or in this case, dry the beans. And what I want to focus on is that these things can be done in a number of different ways. And what I mean by that is that the farmers are doing this in the fields a certain way. You can do these practices at home, and you would use different tools, or you can do this on an industrialized scale, and your production would be, a lot more beans. And the tools that you use for these steps vary based off of what scale you're on and where you're doing this. But the process and the end goal of what you're trying to get to doesn't change. And so I'm going to talk about that mainly, of what the beans are going through. And I'll introduce a few different techniques. So drying and roasting the cacao. What I'm showing here in this top left-hand corner is drying these cacao beans, and it can be achieved in a few different ways: sun drying or artificial drying. So what I'm showing here in this left-hand corner is sun drying. So they're basically laying these beans out in a single layer, and the sun is what is drying these out, sort of what a method that's commonly used by small and sort of like bootstrap farmers. And then once you dry the beans, you go ahead and roast them, much like you would roast nuts or anything else like that. So over a heat source, and you're just kind of browning these up a little bit. What I'm showing you on the right does the exact same thing, but your quantity of beans that you're able to roast is going to be much higher. So you would put the beans in, and then it would roast on sort of like a conveyor belt, and then it would cool for a little bit. So different ways to do this, but your outcome is essentially the same as you have roasted beans. So the next step is steps 5 through 7. You're going to crush, grind, and conch the cacao. So all of these 3 processes are basically taking larger pieces and making them smaller. So first, we're going to start out with crushing. In crushing these beans, we're taking them from these whole beans that you see up here in the left-hand corner. These are roasted. Remember, we just roasted them. And we are breaking them up, or we're crushing them into cacao pieces. These are also called nibs. So you might see them in the grocery store. You can actually purchase them, and they're essentially just crushed up pieces of cacao bean. And some people will add these to their smoothies. They'll eat them like nuts. They might add them to their granola. They're bitter. They certainly don't taste like what you might imagine chocolate would taste like. So they don't have that sweet flavor. But they do add some health benefits, which we'll talk about later. So that's why people might want to add those into their diet. The next step is grinding. We're then taking those nibs and we're grinding them into a fine powder. The last step of this is conching. And with this is actually a pretty long process. It can take anywhere from 18 to 72 hours. And you can think of this as sort of like a really intense mixing, agitating, aerating. What you're doing is you have these big grinders. That's what I'm showing here in the bottom left. And you have these big grinders that are adding air to the product. They're also making it really fine. The product's really fine. And then you're also adding heat. And so that is getting the product really, really, really broken down. And you can see here on the left, when you have finished this process, you have a bar that you could describe as really smooth. So if you look here, the 2 hour, it looks really grainy. And then as you continue adding that heat, continue adding that air, continue getting those particles finer and finer, then you end up with that smooth finished product. A lot of times people have trouble differentiating the difference between grinding and conching, and grinding has no heat source, and whereas conching does. And so that would be a good way to kind of differentiate those two things. So then that leaves us with one of our finished products, the most refined finished product, you could say. So here I'm showing you this product here. I use this example because this is one usually people can resonate with. If you see, it's kind of small, but it says 100% cacao. It's unsweetened. So this is the product of what I just showed you in the previous slide. There's nothing added to it. If we take a closer look, if we take a closer look, you'll see that in this product, it naturally has two ingredients. It naturally has cocoa butter and cocoa powder. And those two things combined is what you would find in a cocoa bean or cacao bean. And so it's about 50% cocoa powder and about 50% of that cocoa butter. A quick side story, since I got involved in this chocolate world, accidentally, one Friday evening, my husband and I were, being the people that we are, nerds, we sat down and we created a lesson for his students. He's a first grade teacher at a local elementary school. And we worked on this science of chocolate lesson, and they do it every Valentine's Day, and they turn into little scientists, and they get to taste test all of these different chocolate products. And unsweetened baking chocolate is one of them that they taste test. And you can imagine, if you've ever tasted this, it's not sweet, it's very bitter. And they think they're about to eat what they understand chocolate to be. And to see their faces and their reaction, they start to get that this doesn't have any sugar, this doesn't have any milk. This is a plant-based product, and they understand sort of what it's made of. And then we go through the different chocolates like we're about to, and we talk about what the difference in ingredients is and how it contributes to the flavor profile. And then they do charting and chart their favorite ones and learn other skills. But it's so funny to see their reactions with this, because if you've tasted this, it's bitter. And so I think for the most part, we might have scarred some kids in thinking that this is what chocolate tastes like. But they have a blast doing it. So you can see that this is 100% cacao product. If we take this product, I want to say to the next level, but if we start adding things into it, the next finished product that we'll talk about is dark chocolate, which was really cool to see y'all say that this was one of your favorite chocolates, because that is I was not expecting that result to occur. And so with dark chocolate, we have the same two products that we had in the previous slide, that 100% cacao, which is comprised of cocoa butter and cocoa powder. And then what we do is we take that product and we add a little bit of sugar to it. And that gives us our dark chocolate. So the more cacao to sugar ratio, so if you have more cacao than you have sugar, the higher percentage of the cacao will be labeled on the product. So you can see here, I have up here in the right-hand corner, a lot of dark chocolates will actually have a percentage on the product, and it will say something like 90% cacao, 85% cacao, whatever the case may be, but it'll have a percentage. And what that percentage is saying is that essentially the higher percentage you get, the more of that cacao product and the less sugar will be in there. Moving on to milk chocolate, the only difference between dark chocolate and milk chocolate, and this one is such a gimme, it makes so much sense when you say it out loud, but most people don't ever think about the differences. But the difference between the dark chocolate and the milk chocolate is just you're adding milk. So it will still have that cocoa butter, that cocoa powder, it will still have that cacao product, and then it will have sugar, milk, and that will give us our milk chocolate. So the ratio of cacao to other products will be lower because you're having more products in there. I hope I'm not over-explaining this too much. Before we get into the next one, Greg, you might have to tell me if this isn't possible, and that's totally fine. Are people able to write into the chat? Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. That's the end.
You bet.
Sweet. Okay, so we're going to get everybody involved in this. So what I commonly hear from people is that white chocolate is not real chocolate. And I'm not going to give anything away, but I want to hear from you guys. So here's my quiz question for you. I want you to write in there in the chat, white chocolate is real chocolate. Is that true? If you think it's true, write A. And if you think it's false, write B. Or you could write true or false, whichever you would like.
And let's give them just a moment or two. I believe there's a 10 to 15 second delay between what I'm hearing and you're hearing, and then what they're actually seeing and hearing as well. And we're seeing them start to pile up in the chat. And it looks overwhelmingly that they're picking B, false. There's a few that have sprinkled in true, but I think the audience, well, now they're starting to trend on true. There we go. True, false, true, false. So it's almost a mixed bag. I would say maybe 65% say false.
Yes, I love the discrepancies in answers. Okay, so that means that a large portion of you guys are going to learn something new today, which is awesome to hear. So the answer to this, drum roll, is actually true, meaning that white chocolate is real chocolate. So let me tell you a little bit more about this. So before I go into that, white chocolate is, well, no. Okay, so the FDA has a legal definition. The Food and Drug Administration has a legal definition of labeling products called white chocolate. And to be labeled white chocolate, the product has to have a certain minimum requirements to meet these FDA standards. So these standards are that white chocolate must have at least 20% cocoa butter, 14% milk solids, and no more than 55% sugar. So there's some flexibility in those percentages, but we know that at bare minimum, it has to have at least 20% cacao butter. So to talk a little bit more on that, white chocolate is just the cacao butter. And all of the other chocolates that we talked about, it was both products that are within a cacao seed, nut, bean. Sorry, that's the word I'm looking for, bean. And in a cacao bean is the cacao butter and the cacao powder. But when we're talking about white chocolate, they just use the cacao butter. And then we add in sugar, and then we add in milk. So certainly with white chocolate, it's the least amount of cacao product, and then more products are added to that. But we do know that you have to have at least 20% cacao butter for this product to be labeled white chocolate. Now, I will say some products that are on the shelves will be labeled something like white melts, or it'll use the term melts. I've seen that one a lot. Or some words that are descriptors of white chocolate, but aren't actually white chocolate. And so that's how they get around that. So if you actually want a white chocolate product, go and read on the product label and it will tell you what it's comprised of. So fun fact. Okay, so we're now going to jump into this next segment where we're going to talk about the power of chocolate and some of the health benefits that are associated with chocolate. I may use the term healthy accidentally, and that's because a lot of these sources that I'm going to pull from use this term, but I want to kind of give you a disclosure. The term healthy is a subjective term and I don't like using it. What is healthy for one person may not be healthy for another person. An example that I'll use is we know that nuts can have a lot of health benefits associated with them. But if someone is allergic to nuts, that is not healthy for them and they should not eat that product. And so all that to say is that when I'm talking about healthy and talking about, adding things into your diet, you will want to make sure that before you make any changes with your diet, talk to your doctor, talk to your registered dietitian, and make sure that this is an appropriate change for you. Okay, so I want you guys to jump into the quiz or jump into the chat box again. And I want to ask you guys, which type of chocolate is the purest form, meaning that it contains the highest percentage of the cacao plant? Is it A, dark chocolate, B, milk chocolate, C, white chocolate, or D, they all contain the same percentage of cacao? Let's see if y'all are paying attention.
And here we go. We're getting some more answers in. Got a couple of A's, 3 A's in a row, another one. So right now, dark chocolate is running away with it, Lizzy. I mean, I don't think we've had a dissenting vote yet. Oh, there we go. One says all contain the same, but it looks like overwhelmingly dark chocolate is our audience's selection for which type of chocolate is the purest form.
Okay, well, it looks like we have a really smart audience then. So you guys are right on the money. The answer is A. And just as a reminder or kind of like a recap, the dark chocolate, this is just going to have sugar added. And so the ratios of the cacao to the other products are going to be higher cacao for the dark chocolate. So one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about sort of what these health benefits are that are associated with chocolate, when you are having chocolate that has a higher percentage of cacao, this is where you'll get more of this product that contains some of these health benefits. I am misquoted all of the time, almost every time, saying something like chocolate is healthy, chocolate is great for you. And do I think that chocolate can be incorporated into a good diet? Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. And when I say a diet, I just mean like what a person consumes. But am I going to say you need to increase your chocolate intake? No, never would I say that. What I am meaning with this is that if you are having sort of some of these chocolate products that have higher amounts of cacao, then you might be able to see some of these benefits that we'll talk about. So let's talk about them. I want you guys, bear with me. It's going to be a little bit awkward here. I want you to close your eyes. I'll tell you when to open them. Just go with me on this. Close your eyes. And I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine a society where people who are 80 years old, have the same blood pressure as people who are 20 years old. Keep your eyes closed. I want you to imagine a society without heart disease, without heart attacks, no hypertension, no strokes. You can open your eyes now. When you imagined this society, what did it look like? Was it futuristic? Were there flying robots, flying cars? Did it look like something straight out of a science fiction movie? Well, I want to introduce you to the Kuna people of Panama. And the reason I had you go through this exercise is because these people are in a society that I just described. So before I go into more details, I was on a quick quiz. I don't know, there for a second. Okay, so the Kuna people of Panama have a much lower incidence of heart disease, almost no hypertension, heart attacks, and stroke. Why? Is it A, because of genetics, B, because of an indigenous diet, or C, because of a stress-free lifestyle? I'll give you all some time to best guess.
And we'll get to the voting. So far, nothing. Crickets, but they're coming. I guarantee that those answers are coming. And as soon as I say that, surely they're going to start popping up. And there they go. They start. And we're looking at B, 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 diet, all the above. A bunch of Bs. D, all the above. A lot of Bs sprinkled with an A here or there. So it looks like overwhelmingly from our audience again, they're saying B, indigenous diet.
All right. And we would be correct. So I'll go through and I'll tell you, some of y'all guessed all of the above, and that would be a really good guess. And I'll tell you why that's incorrect from kind of what our studies are showing us. So the Kuna people of Panama, they consume up to 5 cups per day of this natural cacao. It's the highest consumption compared to any other population on Earth. They have an average blood pressure of 110/70. And it's kind of the medical textbook of a perfect blood pressure. Normal is 120/80. And they have this perfect blood pressure even at the age of 65, which is not old, by the way. But in terms of when our blood pressure can raise and other things start to happen, they're seeing that these people have great heart health, have great health overall in general. And so how did we find out that cacao could have these health benefits? Well, we have to thank the Kuna people of Panama and some studies that people have done on this population. And what these people do, as I mentioned, they consume high amounts of cacao. What they do is they pull these beans off the tree, they grind them, and they make this thick chocolate drink. They don't add anything to it, so it's bitter. It's not sweet. It's not like hot chocolate. And they consume this drink regularly, many, many times a day. And what they have found is that these people have had much lower rates of heart disease, even compared to people within the same region. So these people actually live kind of off the coast. And compared to people of Panama, who they're eating similar diets, similar lifestyles, everything else is very similar, but this one exception of the consumption of this drink. And so that's why the answer to the question that we went through before isn't all of the above. They kind of found this factor to be sort of the common denominator or the difference between the people around that area, and the Kuna people had that difference about them. And so after more studying of this cacao, we started to find some additional health benefits. So with that, we know that it contains antioxidants or flavonols, and that contributes to lowering blood pressure, lowering the risk of coronary heart disease. One hypothesized mechanism with this is it can increase nitric oxide, which promotes vasodilation. So basically our blood vessels widen to allow more blood flow through and causing increased blood circulation, which is good, which is what we want. And so our blood pressure is then decreased and our arteries can then deliver that oxygen-rich blood to the heart. So that's one heart supporting mechanism or connection. And then the other one is there are studies out there showing that these antioxidants or flavonols can decrease the risk of stroke, maybe reduce clotting. Hypothesized mechanism is again linked to that nitric oxide, promote vasodilation, prompting arteries to widen and then not clot. There also are some studies going on about increased brain function. This certainly needs to be further explored. One thing I'll mention also is that a lot of these studies, not all of them, but a lot of them are looking at cacao from the standpoint of consuming it more of like a supplement. So they're having that the bean product in a powder, they grind it down, they roast it, grind it down, and then they have it as what you could kind of think of as a supplement. But so they're not having chocolate bars or things like that we would think of if we're trying to increase our chocolate consumption. So all that to say is that, yes, you can eat your chocolate bars. But when we're talking about these rich benefits of chocolate, a lot of studies are looking at it more of like a supplemental, using that powder as a supplement, as opposed to like chocolate in a form that we would consume. And so that brings us to, you might be wondering, how much chocolate should I eat, or how do I eat this chocolate to get some of these potential benefits? There is no official recommendation. And what I mean by that is the USDA isn't saying isn't saying that like you should have this much chocolate per day or, nothing like that. Whereas they do have those official recommendations for your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, that sort of stuff. But this one study that I wrote really, really, really small down here, it was a meta-analysis. So it looked at a bunch of different published studies. And what they found is they're looking at the consumption of chocolate and the risk for coronary heart disease, stroke, and diabetes, and some of the protective effects that chocolate could have to those diseases. And what this study found was that consuming chocolate in moderation less than 6 servings per week is what it should say. Less than 6 servings per week may be optimal for preventing disease. And what this study defined as a serving would be 30 grams of chocolate, which may seem like a lot, but it's really equating to like one serving being about 5 Hershey Kisses. So, and having about 6 servings of that per week. So it's not, it's a decent amount. But that might be optimal for preventing some of these diseases. But again, I'm talking about when we're choosing these options, choose minimally processed dark chocolate, at least 70% cacao as an occasional treat. We do need to be careful in kind of weighing the benefits versus the risks. Because if we do choose to add chocolate to our diet, we would be adding sugar or adding milk, which has sugar in it. And so we would need to be careful about the added sugars if that's something that we're concerned with. And so it's all about balance here. So what might be a good way to incorporate it into your diet is maybe you're having milk chocolate several times a week. If you can switch that to 70% dark chocolate, that would be a great switch. So that's kind of how we can look at that instead of a standpoint of you need to eat more chocolate in your diet, which is always what how I'm misquoted. So it's just that always just makes me laugh a little bit. Okay, I think this is the coolest part of it all, is that there's actually over 300 chemically active ingredients or compounds in chocolate, which have not all been studied. And there's so many more that we don't even know exist. So lots and lots of research in the future to be found. So how can we incorporate chocolate in our diet in a nutrient-rich way? These, I feel like, I want to be careful not to over-explain them, but if you choose options that are nutrient-rich and you're adding dark chocolate to them, so maybe you have little tangerine or clementine slices that you just dip in some dark chocolate. Maybe you spoonful some chocolate on some parchment paper and put some nuts and seeds and let it chill in the refrigerator or the freezer, whichever one. Or maybe, I always laugh whenever I see anything related to health. They always talk about these oatmeal balls. And so I usually make fun of it whenever I see it, but here I am. So you could also make these peanut butter balls, take some peanut butter, some oats, and then some dark chocolate. You can add some other things in it if you want, nut seeds, and just roll these up. I've seen people add coconut to them. Just roll them up and you have little bite-sized snacks. So easy, nutrient-dense ways to add some chocolate to your diet. Okay, let's see. I have about 12 more minutes. Let's see if I can hit the rest of this. I'll kind of go into overdrive. So transferring over, now talking about how do we use this chocolate? How do we work with this chocolate a little bit more? Well, there's something called tempering. And what tempering is, it sounds scary, but I promise it's not. It's basically heating and cooling chocolate to stabilize it for making chocolate. So you would do this if you were doing like chocolate covered something, or if you were making chocolates from in like a mold or something like that. And the benefits to tempering gives it this smooth and glossy finish, keeps it from easily melting in your fingers, and it prevents it from blooming, which is basically a separation of cocoa butter and other particles in the chocolate. And so you can see here the left versus right, it's untempered, and you can see little white specks, and this has bloomed. And so you can see the little white specks of cocoa powder. And if you were to break this untempered one, it would kind of just, well, first off, it would melt in your hands because that cocoa butter is on the outside. But it would also just kind of bend. Whereas with the tempered chocolate, it would not melt as quickly in your hands and it would snap. And so you don't have to do this step. You can skip this step if you are mixing chocolate into baked goods or something like that, where the appearance isn't necessarily important for the product. But certainly if you're using like candies or chocolate covered something, tempering would be something that might be appealing for you. Let's see. So very quickly, this is a simplified version of this. So when you have melted chocolate, the molecules or the particles of that chocolate are just kind of everywhere. They're kind of in a blob. So I kind of try to depict this with chairs. They're everywhere. There's no formation to them at all. If you have tempered chocolate, there begins to be a formation. So they're all stacked, but they're stacked kind of wonky. These molecules still aren't perfectly stacked on one another. If you tempered it, it's all stacked perfectly. So that's kind of a visual of how these are different. I'll skip this slide because it's basically another iteration of what I just said. So step-by-step guide if you're going to temper something. A few things you'll need: saucepan and heat-proof bowl, a thermometer, rubber spatula, And what you'll want to do is remember, with tempering, you're going through a heating and cooling process. So you're going to break the chocolate into even-sized pieces. You're going to place about 2/3 of that chocolate in the heat-proof bowl over gently simmering water. So don't put the water in the bowl with chocolate. You're going to put the chocolate in the bowl and then the water in a pan below it, or a pot below it. You're going to melt the chocolate gently to a desired melting to temperature. And I'll give you these temperatures in the next slide. So you're basically going to melt the chocolate to a desired temperature. You're going to remove it from the heat, add the last bit of chocolate, and then stir until chocolate gets to a cool down temperature, which I'll give you. So it's cooling down at this part. Someone said double boiler. That's perfect if you have one. That's the ideal tool to use for sure. Return it to the heat, stirring until you heat it back up until this third temperature is reached. So melt, cool, melt again. And then you remove it from the heat and it's ready to use. So I'll whiz past this one, but here's some melting to and cooling down temperatures. And one thing I want to point to specifically is that you'll notice for the white chocolate, you don't heat it as much. And that's because with the white chocolate, remember, you're just having that cocoa butter, which melts more quickly compared to the others. And you don't want it to get too hot and burn. So say you don't need to temper something. Say you just need to melt it, and that works for your product that you're using in the kitchen. You can use a saucepan and a heat-proof bowl or a double boiler. And you never want to place the chocolate in the saucepan over direct heat. It'll overheat too quickly. You can use a double boiler or a water bath. And then when it's 75% melted, you remove it from that heat source and stir. Or you can do it in the microwave. You want to be careful though, because the microwave can make it hotter than you desire to, and it can create hot spots. So chop it into even pieces, do short bursts, frequent stirring and testing, and then don't allow the chocolate to feel hotter than a water bath. Just kind of a rule of thumb. Okay, I really wanted to get to this slide because I think this is really, really interesting. And not necessarily for a good reason. Well, not for a good reason. So fair trade chocolate, you guys might have heard this word before, fair trade. There are a lot of products that are considered fair trade or that can be sold as fair trade. So bananas, coffee beans, but chocolate is one of them. We know that chocolate is a $100 billion industry. And we also know that those people who are actually growing the cacao have a lot of struggles. I included 3 here, but there are many, many struggles that they go through. A lot of them live in extreme poverty, living on less than $2 a day. They rely on this cash crop, which can be unstable. Say they have a bad year. Say they have a storm come through, wash out all their crops. I told you that those trees take 5 years for those pods to grow back on them. So they would be 5 years in without any source of income. They also get 1 payment per year, which means that they have to hold those that funding over for an entire year. Gender inequality, a lot of these areas where they're growing these products, the women aren't allowed to own their own lands. They're not allowed to own the crops. They aren't allowed to apply for credit. And so they are an active member of contributing to producing this food, but they can't ever have their own stake in it. And then lastly, but this certainly doesn't end all of the struggles that they're going through, is a lot of times in this trade, there are child labor and forced labor. So high rates of trafficking and children working in really dangerous conditions. And then, so I would encourage you guys, if you can, to buy your chocolate fair trade. And you can do that by buying your chocolate with this symbol on it. Also, I would really encourage you to go to this website, because this is where you can see what this organization is doing for the people who are growing not only chocolate, but a lot of these other crops as well. And you can also read to see what are some of these struggles that are occurring. And then where are your funds going to if you are supporting fair trade? what are these funds being used for? A lot of them go into cooperatives to share tips and tricks for crop growing, make them more sustainable, looking at providing a fair trade premium so that if anything happens, the price of the product remains stable, to buy land so that the people can put the money back into the crops to make them more reliable suppliers, goes to improving their working conditions, their standard of labor. They do a lot of really good things. So you can see, just look on the package and you can see this emblem, which would show you that they are buying their chocolate through that fair trade organization. The really sad thing or concerning thing is that only about 5% on average, of the cacao crop is sold as fair trade. And so if we're buying these products that are fair trade products, then this group will need to buy more, and they can support a higher percentage of this cacao. So about 95% of their crop that they're selling are sold to kind of like middlemen people, and they don't give back to the farmers, and they buy it at a price that is not fair for the farmers. It doesn't even pay the price of what it costs to make it. And so a lot of people are actually quitting the trade. Okay, I am quickly going to go into how did chocolate become associated with Valentine's Day, because I think this is really interesting. It's kind of like putting all of these stories and pieces together, which is what I'm trying to depict here. So I'm going to do my best to, some of these things are traditions or stories passed down, and some of them are what we know to be true. So it's putting pieces together to kind of come up with how chocolate became associated with Valentine's Day. So we know that the Aztecs drank this drink, this chocolate drink. I talked about that at the beginning, and it was associated as a food for gods. The upper class drank it. It was a lavish gift, and that's how it kind of got associated with being a desirable gift for somebody. Cacao beans also contain organic compounds, tryptophan and phenylethylamine. And both of these compounds mimic emotions a person feels when they are experiencing love. So it connected to like improved mood and happiness. And this is just building on its reputation that this is a desirable gift. Richard Cadbury, that name might sound familiar, that Cadbury name. In England, his dad actually started this chocolate company, and they introduced this process to make drinking chocolate more palatable, and it removed a product or a byproduct of this chocolate. And what he did is he used this byproduct and he made chocolate bars or eating chocolates. And that's how that became started to be something that we consume today. He then is a marketing genius and started putting together these heart-shaped boxes with roses and cupids and all that kind of stuff on it. And he began selling it, but he didn't patent it. And so when we had the commercialization of Valentine's Day in America in the 20th century, people like Russell Stover and a lot of others then started doing this. It's kind of what I was saying here. And selling this product as a product associated with Valentine's Day. And so that's kind of how Valentine's Day got its start. It really became something that a lot of other people hopped onto from a mixture of different stories. So with that, happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Don't forget to grab some fair trade chocolate for your loved ones and you.
Dr. Davis, this is fantastic information. And I know you sped through some things there late in the game, but some very good stuff and things that, let's face it, most of us, many of us didn't know. So thank you so much for spending time with us this evening, being a part of this Valentine's-esque webinar. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day away from your family and being with us.
Of course. Yeah, anytime.
And we will hopefully get you back because we always enjoy having you. So thanks again for being here. And a quick reminder, you can catch a replay of this webinar on our website starting tomorrow. Live attendees will get an email once the link is ready. And be sure to join us for these upcoming The Science of webinars. On Tuesday, March 26th, join us for The Science of Graying. Is it possible to turn back time? Dr. Melissa Harris will be here to give us the hair-raising answers on what's behind hair growing gray. On Thursday, April 11th, come back for The Science of Caffeine, Chemistry, Consumption, and Controversies, when Dr. Daniel Smith will explore all things caffeine. And on Tuesday, April 23rd, we'll host The Science of Sleep from A to Z. Dr. Justin Thomas will be here. We explore the physiology between sleep, how much is needed, and the health consequences of poor sleep. Register for these and many, many more things, including in-person events at alumni.uab.edu/events. Finally, before we go, let us know how we're doing and your thoughts on tonight's webinar and future webinars. The QR code on your screen will go to a short survey. Take a couple seconds just to go do that. Again, Dr. Davis, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everybody in our audience for joining us. And as always, go Blazers.